They thought 73 cents at a tax auction bought them a pile of rotting wood and family shame. But when Harold and Martha lifted that trap door in the cabin floor, what stared back at them was $230 million in cash, bonds, and gold bars that would silence every relative who ever laughed at them. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The funeral home smelled like lilies and regret, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave. Harold sat in the back row, his weathered hands folded in his lap, shoulders slightly hunched in a suit jacket that had seen better decades. Beside him, Martha adjusted her floral print dress, the nicest thing she owned, bought from a thrift store 3 years ago for another funeral they couldn't afford to skip. They were both 71 years old, married for 49 years, and had spent the last decade watching their savings drain away like water through cupped hands. Harold's pension from the factory barely covered rent. Martha's Social Security helped with groceries, but only if they were careful, only if they stretched every dollar until it screamed. The casket at the front held Uncle Eugene, Harold's second cousin once removed, a man he'd met exactly twice in his entire life. Once at a family reunion in 1978, where Eugene had barely said 2 words to anyone, and once at another funeral in 1993, where Eugene left before the reception. Eugene had been a recluse, the kind of family member people whispered about at Thanksgiving but never actually visited. Lived alone somewhere up north, they'd say, never married, made his money doing something with minerals or mining, kept to himself. Died alone in that cabin of his. Such a shame. Harold hadn't wanted to come. The drive from Phoenix to Flagstaff was 3 hours each way, and gas wasn't cheap. But Martha had insisted. Family is family, she'd said quietly that morning, pressing his good shirt with an iron that sputtered and sparked. Even if they never knew us, we should show respect. So they'd driven up in their 1998 Honda Civic, the one with the crack in the windshield and the passenger door that stuck, and now they sat in a funeral home chapel with about 15 other people, most of them looking just as confused about why they were there. The service was brief. A pastor who clearly hadn't known Eugene read generic passages about dust and ashes and eternal rest. No one cried. No one shared memories. It felt less like a funeral and more like a formality, something that had to be done so the lawyers could move forward. When it ended, people filed out quickly, eager to escape the awkward silence. But as Harold and Martha stood to leave, a woman in a sharp grey suit approached them. "Mr. Harold Jensen?" she asked, her voice professional and clipped. He nodded. "I'm Angela Reeves, estate attorney for Eugene Holloway. I need you to stay behind, please. There's a will reading in 20 minutes. Harold and Martha exchanged glances. "Will reading," Harold muttered. "We barely knew the man." "Nevertheless," Angela said, "you're named in the will. Please take a seat in the conference room." She gestured toward a side door. The conference room was small, paneled in cheap wood, and lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. 6 people sat around a rectangular table, and Harold recognized a few faces from the funeral. There was Garrett, Eugene's nephew from his sister's side, mid-40s, wearing designer sunglasses pushed up on his head and a Rolex that caught the light. Beside him sat his wife, Nicole, scrolling through her phone with manicured nails tapping impatiently against the screen. Across from them were 2 other relatives Harold had never met, a younger couple in their 30s who looked annoyed to be there, and an older woman who introduced herself as Eugene's former neighbor. Angela took her seat at the head of the table and opened a leather folder. "Let's begin," she said. Eugene Holloway's estate is relatively straightforward. Most of his liquid assets, approximately $47,000, will be distributed to various charities he specified. There's a small inheritance for his neighbor, $5,000 for care provided in his final years. She nodded to the older woman, who smiled tightly. And then there's the property. Garrett leaned forward. The cabin? Angela nodded. Yes, the cabin and surrounding land. Approximately 12 acres in the White Mountains, just outside of Greer, Arizona. The property has been in the family since 1949, originally purchased by Eugene's father. Eugene lived there for the last 34 years. She paused and looked directly at Harold. He's left it to you. The room went silent. Harold blinked. Excuse me? The cabin and land, Angela repeated. It's yours. Everything in it. The structure, the acreage, all of it. Eugene specified in his will that it should go to you, Harold Jensen, as the only family member who ever treated him with basic human decency. Harold's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Martha gripped his hand under the table. Garrett jerked upright, sunglasses nearly falling off his head. Wait. What? You're giving the property to him? Angela's expression didn't change. I'm not giving anything to anyone. Eugene made this decision years ago. The will is dated 2009 and has been notarized and legally filed. There's no contest. Garrett laughed, sharp and bitter. You've got to be kidding me. That property is worth something. Prime land, mountain views, and you're handing it to some old guy who probably didn't even remember Eugene existed. Harold felt his face flush hot. Martha squeezed his hand harder. Actually, Harold said quietly, I sent Eugene a Christmas card every year for the last 20 years. Never heard back, but I sent them anyway. Figured even if he didn't want family around, he shouldn't feel forgotten. The room went quiet again. Angela nodded. Yes, Eugene mentioned that in his notes. He appreciated it. More than you knew, apparently. Garrett slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. That cabin could be sold, developed, turned into something useful, and you're giving it to someone who's probably going to let it rot. It's already rotting, Nicole chimed in, still looking at her phone. I drove past it once. Total dump. Falling apart. Probably condemned. The younger couple nodded in agreement. Honestly, Angela, the man said, why would Eugene saddle someone with that disaster? It's basically a teardown. Angela closed the folder. Because it was his property and his choice. If you'd like to contest the will, you're welcome to hire an attorney. But I'll tell you right now it won't go anywhere. The document is airtight. Harold sat frozen, his mind spinning. A cabin. Land. He'd never owned property in his life. They'd rented the same one-bedroom apartment in Phoenix for 18 years, the kind of place with beige carpet and water stains on the ceiling. The idea of owning 12 acres of anything felt impossible, surreal. But Garrett wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk spreading across his face. Well, congratulations, Harold. You just inherited the biggest pile of junk in Arizona. No running water, no electricity, roofs half caved in, and it's 40 minutes from the nearest paved road. Have fun with that. Nicole snickered. Yeah, enjoy your tetanus shot. You're gonna need it. The younger couple exchanged glances and stood. We're not wasting any more time here, the woman said. Come on, babe. This is a joke. They left without another word. Garrett and Nicole followed, but not before Garrett paused at the door and looked back at Harold. Hey, Harold, when you realize what a nightmare that place is, give me a call. I'll take it off your hands for, I don't know, $500. As a favor. He winked and walked out, his laughter echoing down the hallway. The older neighbor woman stood as well, giving Harold a sympathetic look. Eugene was a good man, she said softly. Don't let them get to you. He wanted you to have it for a reason. Then she too was gone. Harold and Martha sat alone with Angela, the fluorescent lights buzzing above them. Angela slid a thick envelope across the table. Here are the keys, the deed, and the property address. There's also a map and some notes Eugene left for you. She hesitated, then added, for what it's worth. Eugene was very specific about this. He said you were the only person in the family who ever treated him like a human being. That mattered to him. Harold took the envelope with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered. The drive back to Phoenix was quiet. Martha held the envelope in her lap, turning it over in her hands like it might disappear if she looked away. Harold gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his mind racing. "What are we supposed to do with a cabin?" he finally said. "We can't afford to fix it up. We can't even afford the gas to drive up there and look at it." Martha stared out the window at the desert landscape blurring past. "Maybe we don't have to fix it," she said softly. "Maybe we just go see it. Just once." Harold glanced at her. "And then what?" She shrugged. "I don't know, but it's ours, Harold. For the first time in our lives, we own something, even if it's broken, even if it's nothing. It's ours." He wanted to argue, wanted to say it was foolish to waste time on a piece of land they'd never use, but something in her voice stopped him. There was a hope there, fragile and quiet, and he couldn't bring himself to crush it. 2 days later, Harold's phone rang. It was Garrett. "Hey, Harold, just checking in," Garrett said, his tone dripping with false concern. "You been up to see your palace yet?" Harold sighed. "Not yet." Garrett laughed. "Yeah, I figured. Look, man, I'm serious about my offer. $500 cash today. You sign it over, I'll handle all the paperwork, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm doing you a favor." Harold's jaw tightened. "It's not for sale, Garrett." There was a pause. "You're kidding, right? You're really going to hold on to that dump?" "Listen, I'm trying to help you out here. That place is a liability. You're going to end up paying more in back taxes and repairs than it's worth. Just let it go." "I said no," Harold repeated, his voice firmer now. "Suit yourself," Garrett said, and the line went dead. Over the next week, the calls kept coming. First Garrett, then Nicole, then the younger couple whose names Harold couldn't even remember. Each one had a new angle, a new insult disguised as advice. "You're being stubborn. You're being foolish. You're going to regret this." Even distant relatives Harold hadn't heard from in decades started reaching out. "I heard you got Eugene's old place." "That's rough, man. If you need help getting rid of it, I know a guy." Martha watched Harold field the calls, his frustration mounting with each one. Finally, one evening, as they sat at their tiny kitchen table eating spaghetti with jarred sauce, she set down her fork and looked at him. "Let's go," she said. "What?" "Let's go see the cabin. This weekend. Pack a bag, drive up, and see it for ourselves." Harold rubbed his face. "Martha, we don't even know what we're walking into. Could be dangerous. Could be full of mold or asbestos or God knows what." She reached across the table and took his hand. "We've lived our whole lives playing it safe, Harold. We worked hard, saved what we could, and it still wasn't enough. We're still broke. We're still struggling. Maybe this cabin is nothing. Maybe it's exactly what they say, a pile of junk, but maybe it's something more. And I want to know. I want to see it. I want to stand on land that's ours. Just once." Harold looked into her eyes, those same eyes he'd fallen in love with 49 years ago, and he couldn't say no. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll go." They left early Saturday morning, the Honda loaded with a cooler of sandwiches, bottled water, flashlights, and a first aid kit Martha had insisted on packing. The drive took longer than expected. The highway gave way to winding mountain roads, then to dirt paths barely wide enough for one car. The trees grew taller and denser, pines and aspens crowding the roadside. The air grew cooler, thinner. Harold's hands ached from gripping the wheel as the car bounced over rocks and ruts. Martha held onto the door handle, silent but steady. When they finally reached the address Angela had given them, Harold almost drove past it. The cabin sat back from the road, nearly hidden by overgrown brush and fallen branches. He pulled onto a narrow dirt driveway, the car scraping against weeds, and stopped. They both stared. The cabin was worse than Harold had imagined. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing in patches. The front porch tilted dangerously to one side, wooden steps half rotted through. Windows were cracked or missing entirely, covered with yellowed plastic sheeting that flapped in the breeze. The siding was weathered grey, peeling in long strips. The whole structure looked like it might collapse if you sneezed too hard. "Oh my," Martha whispered. Harold said nothing. He turned off the engine and they sat in silence, staring at the wreckage of their inheritance. Finally, Martha opened her door. "Well," she said, "let's see the inside." Harold followed her slowly, each step careful on the uneven ground. The porch groaned under their weight. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, the lock broken. Harold pushed it open with a creak that echoed through the trees. Inside was dim, musty, cold. Dust hung in the air like fog. The main room was small, maybe 12 feet by 15 feet, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a kitchenette on the other. The floor was scarred hardwood, warped in places. Furniture sat covered in stained sheets, ghosts of a life lived alone. Martha walked in slowly, her shoes crunching on debris. Harold followed, his heart sinking with every step. There were 2 other rooms, a bedroom with a bare mattress and a bathroom with a rust-stained sink and a toilet that definitely didn't work. The whole place smelled like decay and abandonment. Harold turned to Martha, ready to say, "Let's just go, let's forget this whole thing," but she was standing in the middle of the main room, looking around with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She turned to him, and to his surprise, she was smiling. Just a little, just enough to make her eyes crinkle at the corners. "I'm thinking," she said, "that this is the first place we've ever owned, and that's something." Harold wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to get in the car and drive back to their cramped apartment and forget this entire mess. But Martha walked over to one of the covered chairs and pulled back the sheet. Dust billowed up, making her cough, but she kept going. Underneath was a simple wooden rocking chair, scarred but solid. She sat down carefully, and it held. She rocked once, twice, and looked up at Harold. "We could fix this," she said. Harold shook his head. "Martha, we don't have the money to fix this. We don't have the skills. We're in our 70s. She kept rocking. "I know, but it's ours." They stayed until the sun started to set, walking the property, finding the old well, the shed full of rusted tools, the remnants of a garden long overgrown. The land itself was beautiful, surrounded by towering pines with a view of distant mountains. If you ignored the cabin, if you just looked at the trees and the sky, it was peaceful. It was the kind of place people paid thousands of dollars to visit for a weekend. And it was theirs. They drove back to Phoenix in the dark, exhausted, dirty, and quiet. When they got home, Harold checked his voicemail. There were 3 new messages, all from relatives. The first was Garrett again. "Hey Harold, heard you actually drove up to see that disaster. Hope you brought a bulldozer. Seriously man, call me, we need to talk." The second was from Nicole. "Harold, this is ridiculous. You're wasting everyone's time. That property should be sold, divided up among the family. You're being selfish." The third was from the younger couple. "Yeah, so we talked to a lawyer, and apparently there's a clause about abandoned property. If you don't maintain it, the county can seize it. Just thought you should know. You're welcome." Harold deleted all 3 messages. Martha stood in the doorway watching him. "What did they say?" He looked at her. "They think we're stupid. They think we should give up." She nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" Harold sat down heavily on their worn couch, his body aching from the long day. "I think," he said, "that I'm tired of people telling me what I should do. I think I'm tired of feeling small. I think maybe, just maybe, we should stop listening to them." Martha sat down beside him, her hand finding his. "So we keep it?" Harold took a breath. "Yeah, we keep it. And maybe we go back. Maybe we clean it up a little. See what's really there." She leaned her head on his shoulder. Okay. Over the next 3 weeks, they made the drive up to the cabin 4 more times. Each trip, they brought supplies, cleaning products, trash bags, work gloves. They cleared out years of debris, mouse nests, broken furniture, piles of old magazines. They swept and scrubbed. They patched holes with plywood Harold bought at a discount store. They replaced broken window panes with plastic sheeting and duct tape. It wasn't pretty, but it was progress. And every single time they went, Harold's phone would ring on the drive home. It was always a relative. Always the same questions disguised as concern. You still wasting your time up there? Heard the roof's about to collapse. You know there's black mold, right? That stuff will kill you. Why are you being so stubborn? Just sell it and move on. Harold stopped answering. He let the calls go to voicemail, let the messages pile up. Martha did the same. They stopped talking about the cabin to anyone except each other. It became their secret, their project, their small rebellion against everyone who'd ever counted them out. On their 5th trip, as they worked to clear brush away from the front porch, a truck pulled up the driveway. Harold tensed, but it was just an older man in coveralls and a baseball cap. He introduced himself as Frank, Eugene's former neighbor, the one from a few properties over. Just wanted to check in, Frank said. Make sure you folks are all right. Eugene was a good man. Quiet, but good. They talked for a while, Frank sharing stories about Eugene, how he'd lived alone for decades but always kept to himself, never caused trouble. Helped me fix my fence once, Frank said. Never asked for anything in return. When he said goodbye, he handed Harold a piece of paper. My number, Frank said. If you need anything, call. Not everyone up here is bad people. It was the first kindness anyone had shown them about the cabin. Martha cried a little after Frank left. On their 6th trip, they made a discovery. Harold was pulling up old floorboards in the bedroom, trying to assess whether the subfloor was salvageable, when he noticed something odd. The boards in one corner didn't sit flush with the others. There was a slight gap, almost imperceptible. He pried them up carefully and found that the floor beneath wasn't just wood. It was metal. A metal plate, about 3 feet by 3 feet, covered in dust and grime. Martha, he called, come look at this. She came in, wiping her hands on her jeans. What is it? I don't know. He brushed away more dirt, revealing seams in the metal. It's a hatch. They looked at each other. Harold's heart started to pound. Why would Eugene have a hatch in his bedroom floor? Martha knelt beside him. Only one way to find out. Harold examined the edges. There was no handle, no obvious way to open it. But as he ran his fingers along the seam, he felt something, a small indentation, just big enough for a fingertip. He hooked his finger in and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, harder this time, and felt something shift. A soft click. Then the hatch lifted just an inch. Harold and Martha both jerked back. The hatch was unlocked. Slowly, Harold lifted it all the way open. Beneath was darkness. Cool air wafted up, carrying a scent of earth and something else, something metallic. Martha grabbed one of the flashlights from their supply bag and handed it to Harold. Her hand was shaking. Harold turned on the light and aimed it down into the opening. Wooden stairs descended into blackness. His throat went dry. Martha leaned in beside him, her breath catching. What do you think is down there? Harold's voice came out as a whisper. I have no idea. Harold aimed the flashlight beam down the wooden stairs. They looked old but solid, each step carefully constructed from thick planks. The walls on either side were concrete, rough and grey, disappearing into darkness below. Martha, he said quietly, maybe we should wait. Get someone else to check this out first. What if it's not safe? Martha was already reaching for the second flashlight. Harold Jensen, she said firmly. We've spent 6 weeks cleaning mouse droppings and replacing rotten boards. We're not stopping now. Besides, who would we call? Garrett? So he can take whatever's down there? Harold couldn't argue with that. He tested the first step with his weight. It held. "All right," he said, "but stay behind me. If anything feels wrong, we come right back up." They descended slowly, one step at a time. Harold counted 12 steps before his boot hit flat ground. The air was cooler down here, dry and still. He swept the flashlight in a wide arc and his breath caught. They were standing in a room. Not a crawl space, not a root cellar, but an actual underground room. The walls were concrete, professionally poured, smooth and even. The ceiling was reinforced with steel beams. The floor was concrete as well, level and clean, no dirt, no moisture. This wasn't some makeshift hiding spot dug out with a shovel. This was engineered, built with precision and purpose. The room was roughly 20 feet by 15 feet. Against the far wall stood a series of metal filing cabinets, 4 of them, tall and imposing. Beside them were several large plastic storage containers, the heavy-duty kind used for moving or long-term storage. And in the center of the room sat something that made Harold's heart skip. A massive safe, old and industrial, the kind you'd see in a bank vault from decades ago. It was taller than Martha, black metal with a large wheel lock mechanism on the front. Martha moved her flashlight across the space. "Harold," she whispered, "what is all this?" He didn't answer because he didn't know. Eugene had lived alone for 34 years in a falling-apart cabin, but beneath it, he'd built this. Why? Harold walked to the filing cabinets first. The drawers weren't locked. He opened the top one and found it full of folders, neatly labeled, organized with tabs. He pulled one out at random and opened it. Inside were documents, property deeds, mineral rights certificates, survey maps, all dated from the 1940s through the 1960s. Another folder held correspondence, letters between Eugene's father and various mining companies, geological surveys, claims filed with the state. Martha opened another drawer and found more of the same. Financial records, bank statements, investment portfolios. Some papers were so old they were brittle to the touch. "Harold," she said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger, "look at this." He came over and she opened it carefully. Inside, handwritten entries in neat script detailed purchases, sales and transactions going back to 1947. Precious metals, it read at the top. Gold, silver, platinum. Below were dates and amounts. March 15, 1947, purchased 10 ounces gold at $35 per ounce. June 3, 1948, purchased 20 ounces gold at $35 per ounce. The entries went on for pages, sometimes multiple purchases per month, spanning decades. Harold flipped to the last entry. December 19, 2003, transferred holdings to secure storage. Total accumulated, see Vault Manifest. Harold looked at Martha. Vault Manifest? She pointed to the safe. They walked over to it together. The safe was a beast, easily 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide. The metal was worn but solid, the lock mechanism untouched by rust. There was a combination dial in the center of the wheel lock, and above it a small brass plate with an engraving, Holloway Family Trust, established 1946. Harold tried the wheel. It didn't budge. "Of course," Martha said. "We need the combination." They searched the filing cabinets again, pulling out folder after folder, looking for anything that might contain numbers, a code, a hint. They found more documents, more records, but nothing that looked like a safe combination. Martha sat down on one of the plastic storage containers, exhausted. "This is impossible," she said. "We could be down here for days and never find it." Harold walked the perimeter of the room again, shining his light into every corner. Then he noticed something he'd missed before. In the far corner, partially hidden behind the filing cabinets, was a small wooden desk. He moved one of the cabinets aside, the metal scraping loudly against concrete, and found the desk pushed against the wall. It was simple, old, with 2 drawers. He opened the first drawer, empty except for a few pencils and a ruler. He opened the second drawer. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed. On the front, written in the same neat script from the ledger, were 2 words: for family. His hands trembled as he picked it up. Martha came over, looking over his shoulder. "Open it," she said. Harold broke the seal and pulled out a folded letter. He unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've been deemed worthy enough to inherit what I've protected for most of my life. My father, Cornelius Holloway, was a prospector and a smart man. In 1946, he purchased land rich in mineral deposits during a time when most people were too focused on rebuilding after the war to pay attention to the mountains. He filed claims, worked the land quietly, and accumulated wealth that no one knew about. He taught me to be careful, to be private, to trust no one with what we had. When he died in 1971, he left everything to me with one instruction: protect it, grow it, and pass it on only to someone worthy. I never married, never had children. I watched my extended family from a distance and saw greed, saw cruelty, saw people who would destroy this legacy for a quick payout. But there was one person who showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. Harold Jensen. Every Christmas for 20 years I received a card from him. Simple, handwritten, wishing me well. He never asked for money, never asked for favors. He just remembered I existed. That's rare. That's worth something. If you're reading this, Harold, then you found the room. The combination to the safe is written on the back of this letter. Inside, you'll find the culmination of 70 years of careful accumulation. My father's gold and silver, my own investments, bonds, certificates, cash in currencies that have appreciated significantly. The total value, as of my last assessment in 2008, is approximately $230 million. Harold stopped reading. The flashlight nearly slipped from his hand. Martha made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. He looked at her, his face pale. "That can't be right," he whispered. Martha grabbed the letter from his shaking hands and read the number again. $230 million. Her voice cracked on the last word. Harold sank down onto the floor, his back against the filing cabinet. His heart hammered in his chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People like them didn't find $230 million hidden under a cabin floor. Martha read the rest of the letter aloud, her voice shaking. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you'll doubt this letter, doubt me, doubt everything. But I assure you it's real. It's yours, legally, properly, transferred through my will. The deed to this property gives you full ownership of everything on it and under it. Use it wisely. Use it well. Don't let the vultures take it from you. And Harold, thank you for being kind to a lonely old man. It meant more than you'll ever know. Eugene Holloway." Martha turned the letter over. On the back, written in the same careful script, were 6 numbers: 9, 14, 37, 42, 8, 23, the combination. They sat in silence for a long time. Harold's mind couldn't process what he'd just heard. $230 million. The number was too big, too impossible. They'd spent their entire lives scraping by. They'd eaten generic cereal and day-old bread. They'd patched clothes until the patches needed patches. They'd lain awake at night worrying about medical bills and car repairs and whether they'd have enough money to keep the lights on. And now this. Finally, Martha stood. Her knees cracked as she did. She walked to the safe and looked at Harold. "Do you want to open it?" He stared at her, then at the safe, then back at her. What if it's not real? What if this is some kind of joke or a mistake or... Martha knelt beside him and took his hands. "Then we'll know. But we have to look. We've come this far." Harold nodded slowly. Together, they stood and approached the safe. Martha held the letter while Harold reached for the combination dial. His fingers were stiff, clumsy. He turned the dial to 9. It moved smoothly, well-maintained despite decades underground, then 14, then 37, then 42, then 8. Finally, 23. He heard a soft click inside the mechanism. He grabbed the wheel lock and turned. It was heavy, requiring both hands, but it moved. The bolts inside slid back with a solid thunk. The safe door was massive, at least 6 inches thick. Harold pulled on the handle and it swung open slowly, hinges groaning. Inside was darkness. He shone his flashlight in and the beam reflected off something metallic, something that glinted and gleamed. Martha raised her flashlight too. They both looked inside, and what they saw made the breath leave their lungs. Stacks of gold bars, real gold bars, arranged neatly on shelves. Each bar was stamped with weights and purity marks. Harold reached out with a trembling hand and touched one. It was cool, smooth, heavy. Beneath the gold bars were stacks of silver bars, equally organized. On another shelf were bundles of cash, wrapped in plastic, organized by denomination. $100 bills, $50 bills, even some older currency that Harold didn't recognize. There were document tubes, the kind used to protect important papers. There were small boxes containing coins, gold coins, silver coins, some so old they had to be collector's items. And in the very back were rows of binders, neatly labeled. Bonds, certificates of deposit, stock certificates, property deeds, offshore accounts. Martha's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the concrete floor, staring into the safe. Harold couldn't move. He stood frozen, his mind unable to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. This was real. All of it was real. The gold alone, just what he could see on the top shelf, had to be worth millions. And there was so much more. How long they sat there, neither could say. Minutes, maybe hours. Time seemed to stop in that underground room. Finally, Martha spoke. "Harold," she said, her voice barely audible. "What do we do?" He looked down at her, his wife of 49 years, the woman who'd stood by him through factory layoffs and medical scares and decades of just barely getting by. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands shaking. He sat down beside her and pulled her close. "I don't know," he whispered. "I really don't know. What happens next will turn their lives upside down, reveal truths about family that will break their hearts, and remind us why sometimes the quietest acts of kindness carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." They eventually made their way back up the stairs, both moving like sleepwalkers. Harold carefully lowered the hatch and replaced the floorboards, making sure everything looked undisturbed. They gathered their cleaning supplies in a daze, barely speaking, and locked up the cabin. The drive back to Phoenix was the longest of their lives. Neither of them could find words big enough for what they'd discovered. They kept glancing at each other, opening their mouths to speak, then closing them again. What could you say? How do you process finding more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes? When they got back to their apartment, it was after midnight. Martha made tea. They didn't drink. Harold sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope he'd brought with him, the one with Eugene's letter. Finally, Martha broke the silence. "We can't tell anyone." Harold looked up. "What?" "We can't tell anyone," she repeated. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. Think about what happened with just the cabin. Think about Garrett and Nicole and all those calls. If they find out about what's in that safe—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Harold rubbed his face. "But we have to tell someone eventually. Lawyers, banks, the IRS. You don't just find $230 million and keep it secret." Martha got up and began pacing their tiny kitchen. "I know, but not yet. First, we need to understand what we actually have. We need to figure out if it's really legal, really ours. We need a plan." Harold nodded slowly. "Okay, so we go back. We document everything. We photograph it, catalog it, figure out exactly what Eugene left us. Then we find a lawyer, someone not from Flagstaff, someone who doesn't know us or the family, someone who can help us do this right." They spent the rest of the night talking in whispers, making lists, planning their next moves. By dawn, they had a rough strategy. They would continue to visit the cabin regularly, just as they had been, so no one would suspect anything had changed. They would bring a camera and document everything in the vault. They would research estate lawyers, tax attorneys, people who specialized in sudden wealth. And they would tell absolutely no one, not friends, not neighbors, and definitely not family. The next morning, Harold's phone rang. It was Garrett. "Hey Harold, just checking in. You still playing house up at that dump?" Harold's grip on the phone tightened. "We're fixing it up," he said carefully. "Doing what we can." Garrett laughed. "Man, you are stubborn. Look, seriously, I've got a buddy who's interested in the land. He's willing to go up to $2,000. That's a pretty good deal for a place that's falling apart." "Not interested," Harold said. Garrett's tone shifted, frustration creeping in. "Why are you being like this? It's a piece of junk. You're throwing away time and money for what? Pride?" Harold thought about the vault beneath the cabin floor, about the gold bars and the letter and the $230 million that Garrett would never, ever get his hands on. "Yeah," Harold said, "pride." And he hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, Harold and Martha made 3 more trips to the cabin. Each time, they descended into the vault and spent hours cataloging everything. Martha brought a notebook and wrote down every detail. Harold used a disposable camera, the kind you buy at a drugstore, because they didn't want digital photos that could be traced or hacked. They photographed every bar of gold, every stack of cash, every document. They opened the binders and found bonds issued by the United States Treasury, some dating back to the 1950s. They found stock certificates for companies that had since been bought out or merged, now worth exponentially more than their original value. They found property deeds for land in 3 different states. They found bank account information for offshore holdings in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. The scope of Eugene's wealth was staggering, and the documentation was meticulous. Every single item had a paper trail, every purchase had a receipt, every transaction had a record. Eugene, or his father before him, had been extraordinarily careful. This wasn't ill-gotten money or stolen goods. This was a lifetime, multiple lifetimes, of legal accumulation and careful investment. On their 4th documentation trip, they found something else tucked in the back of one of the filing cabinets, a letter addressed to the Internal Revenue Service, dated 2007, with a copy of a filing. Eugene had declared the vault as a personal trust, had paid taxes on its estimated value, had done everything legally. There was even a receipt from a tax attorney in Phoenix, paid in full. Harold sat back on his heels, staring at the document. "He did it right," Harold said, almost laughing. "Eugene did everything right, legally, properly, by the book." Martha smiled through tears, because he knew. He knew someone would try to take it away. He protected it. He protected us. They finished their documentation on the 5th trip. By then, they had 3 notebooks full of inventories and 2 rolls of film ready to be developed. They also found, buried in one of the plastic storage containers, something that made Martha cry: photo albums. Dozens of them, chronicling the Holloway family going back generations. Pictures of Eugene as a young man, strong and serious. Pictures of his father, Cornelius, covered in dirt from prospecting. Pictures of mines and mountains and men working with picks and shovels. And tucked into the last album, a single photograph that made Harold's throat close up. It was a picture of him and Martha, cut from one of the Christmas cards he'd sent. They were standing in front of a Christmas tree at some church function, both smiling, both decades younger. Eugene had kept it, had looked at it, had remembered them. Martha held the photo album close to her chest. "He was so alone," she whispered. "All this wealth, all this success, and he was so alone." Harold put his arm around her. But he wasn't cruel. He could have been, with all this. But he wasn't. He chose kindness, even at the end. They sealed the vault that night, reset the combination, and closed up the cabin. But before they left, Harold did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He prayed. Not in a church, not with fancy words, just standing in that broken-down cabin, looking up at the sagging ceiling and saying thank you. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for trusting us. We won't let you down. Back in Phoenix, they began the next phase. Martha made calls to law offices in Tucson and Scottsdale, places far enough away that the Holloway name wouldn't immediately raise flags. She asked careful questions about estate law, trust management, sudden inheritance. She took notes. Harold went to the library and checked out books on wealth management, tax law, and asset protection. At night, they studied together at their kitchen table like college students cramming for finals. It was overwhelming, intimidating, but also thrilling. They were learning, planning, taking control. 3 weeks after finding the vault, they finally made an appointment with an attorney in Scottsdale. His name was David Chen, and he specialized in estate planning and asset management. His office was in a sleek building with glass walls and expensive furniture. Harold felt out of place in his worn khakis and button-up shirt. Martha clutched her purse like a life-preserver. David Chen was younger than they expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He gestured for them to sit. "So," he said, settling behind his desk, "you mentioned on the phone that you've inherited some property and assets. Can you tell me more?" Harold and Martha exchanged glances. They'd agreed on the drive up to be honest but cautious. Harold pulled out a folder containing copies of the will, the deed, and one page from Eugene's letter, the page that mentioned the approximate value. He slid it across the desk. David read in silence. His eyebrows went up. His expression shifted from polite interest to sharp focus. $230 million, he said slowly. "You're certain of this number?" "We've documented everything," Martha said. "Gold, silver, bonds, cash, property. It's all there, all legal, all properly recorded." David leaned back in his chair, studying them. "Have you told anyone else about this?" "No one," Harold said. "Just you." David nodded slowly. "Good. That's very good." He tapped the papers. "This is going to require significant work. Tax filings, trust establishment, asset liquidation strategy, legal protection. You're going to need a team, accountants, financial advisors, possibly security." Harold's stomach dropped. "Security?" David's expression was serious. "Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, the moment this becomes public knowledge, and it will eventually, you're going to have people coming out of the woodwork. Family, friends, strangers, scammers. Everyone will want a piece of this. You need to be prepared." Martha's voice was small. "We just want to do the right thing. We don't want trouble." David's expression softened. "I understand, and I'll help you. But you need to understand your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine. Everything will be different." Harold reached over and took Martha's hand. "We know," he said quietly. "We've been poor our whole lives. People have always overlooked us, dismissed us. But we're not stupid. We're not naive. We know what's coming." David studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then let's get to work." David Chen's team moved quickly. Within a week, Harold and Martha found themselves sitting in a conference room with 3 accountants, 2 tax attorneys, and a private security consultant. The weight of it all pressed down on them like gravity had doubled. The head accountant, a sharp woman named Teresa with reading glasses on a chain, spread documents across the long table. "Based on the documentation you provided and current market values," she said, tapping her pen against a spreadsheet, "the total estate value is actually higher than Eugene's estimate, approximately $247 million. Martha made a small sound. Harold couldn't breathe. Teresa continued, "The gold alone is worth roughly $83 million at today's prices. The silver another $12 million. The bonds and certificates, many have matured or appreciated significantly. The offshore accounts have been accruing interest for decades, and the property deeds, 2 of them are for land that's now in the path of major development." Those parcels alone are valued at 18 million. Harold's hand trembled as he reached for the water glass in front of him. "This is real," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "This is actually real." David leaned forward. "It's real. And it's yours. Eugene's will is ironclad. The property transfer was legal. The assets were properly declared and taxed during his lifetime. You have legitimate ownership. But, and this is critical, the moment we begin liquidating or transferring assets, it becomes public record. There's no way around that." The security consultant, a former police detective named Marcus, spoke up. "Which means you need to prepare for attention. Media attention, family attention, potentially dangerous attention. People have been killed for far less than $247 million. Martha gripped Harold's arm. David raised a hand. "We're not trying to frighten you, but you need to be realistic. We recommend several immediate steps. First, establish a revocable living trust. All assets transfer into the trust, which provides legal protection and privacy. Second, set up a separate LC for property management. Third, hire personal security, at least for the first 6 months. Fourth, change your phone numbers and consider relocating temporarily." Harold shook his head. "Relocate? We can't just leave. We have a life, an apartment." David's expression was patient but firm. "Mr. Jensen, the moment your relatives find out about this, and they will find out, your current apartment will become a circus. Trust me." The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, Harold and Martha had signed more documents than they'd signed in their entire lives. They authorized David to begin the trust establishment, approved Teresa to start the asset valuation process, and reluctantly agreed to meet with Marcus about security measures. When they finally left the building, it was dark outside. They sat in their Honda in the parking garage, neither moving. Martha spoke first. "I'm scared." Harold looked at her. "Me too. But we're doing this right. We're getting help. We're being smart." Martha nodded, but her hands were still shaking. "What if they hate us? What if the family turns on us completely?" Harold started the car. "Then they hate us. We've lived without them this long." 2 days later, the process began in earnest. David's team moved with military precision. The trust was established under the name Holloway Family Legacy Trust, with Harold and Martha as trustees. An LLC was created for property holdings. Bank accounts were opened at a private wealth management firm, and slowly, carefully, assets began to be transferred, liquidated, and secured. The gold and silver were moved first, transported by armored car from the cabin vault to a secure storage facility in Phoenix. Harold and Martha watched as men in tactical gear carefully loaded case after case into reinforced vehicles. It felt surreal, like watching a movie about someone else's life. The bonds were authenticated and either cashed or rolled into new investments. The offshore accounts were brought into compliance with United States tax law, requiring mountains of paperwork, but proving that Eugene had done everything legally. The properties were assessed, and decisions were made about which to keep and which to sell. Through it all, Harold and Martha tried to maintain their normal life. They still lived in their one-bedroom apartment. They still bought generic groceries. Harold still drove the same Honda with the cracked windshield. But inside, everything had changed. They barely slept. They jumped at every unexpected sound. They looked over their shoulders constantly. And then, exactly 3 weeks after their first meeting with David, the secret got out. Harold never knew exactly how it happened. Maybe someone at the bank talked. Maybe a clerk at the county recorder's office noticed the transfer documents. Maybe it was just bad luck. But on a Tuesday morning, his phone rang. It was Garrett. Uncle Harold. Garrett's voice was warm, friendly, everything it hadn't been before. "Hey, I've been meaning to call you. I wanted to apologize for how I acted about the cabin. I was out of line. You were right to keep it. Family property should stay in the family." Harold's blood went cold. "What do you want, Garrett?" Garrett laughed. Nothing. I just..." I heard through the grapevine that you might have found some of Eugene's old stuff up there. Mining equipment, maybe some antique tools. I've got a buddy who collects that kind of thing. Thought maybe we could help you sell it, make a little money." Harold closed his eyes. "Who told you?" "Told me what?" Garrett's voice was innocent, but Harold could hear the edge underneath. "I just heard you've been spending a lot of time at the cabin, making improvements." "That's great. Really great. Look, why don't we meet up, grab coffee, talk about the property? I've got some ideas that could benefit everyone." "Not interested," Harold said, and hung up. His hands were shaking. Martha looked up from the couch. "What's wrong?" "They know," Harold said. "I don't know how, but they know something." The calls started immediately after that. Garrett called 3 more times that day. Nicole called. The young couple whose names Harold finally learned were Derek and Ashley called. Then people he barely remembered. Second cousins, Eugene's nephew from his other sister, a woman who claimed to be Eugene's ex-girlfriend from the 1980s. Everyone suddenly wanted to reconnect. Everyone suddenly cared about family. Everyone had suggestions about the cabin, about Eugene's estate, about how things should be handled. Harold and Martha stopped answering. They let every call go to voicemail. But the messages grew more aggressive. "Harold, this is Garrett. We need to talk. You can't just shut family out. Call me back." "Harold, it's Nicole. Look, we know Eugene left you something valuable. We're not stupid. We have a right to know what's going on. That property should be shared among the family. This is Derek. My lawyer says we might have grounds to contest Eugene's will. He wasn't of sound mind at the end. We're just trying to do what's right. Talk to us before this gets ugly." Martha listened to one message and started crying. "They're threatening us," she said. "After everything, after all the years of them ignoring us, now they're threatening us." Harold held her, his own anger building. David Chen called that evening. "Word is out," he said without preamble. "I've already received 2 calls from attorneys representing various members of the Holloway family. They're asking questions about the estate, about asset distribution. I told them to put everything in writing and that all communication goes through me." "What are they saying?" Harold asked. David sighed. "The usual. Claims that Eugene was mentally incompetent. Suggestions that you exerted undue influence. Threats of litigation. One attorney even suggested that you manipulated a vulnerable old man." Harold felt sick. "That's not true. Eugene left us that cabin years ago. The will was written in 2009. "I know," David said, "and we have all the documentation to prove it. Eugene was evaluated by multiple doctors up until 2017. He was completely sound of mind. His will is legal and binding. These are empty threats designed to intimidate you. Don't let them work." But that was easier said than done. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. Garrett showed up at their apartment building. Harold saw him from the window, standing by the entrance, looking up. He didn't go down. He just closed the blinds and waited until Garrett left. Nicole sent a certified letter demanding a full accounting of Eugene's estate and claiming she was entitled to 1/3 as a direct niece. David sent back a formal response, citing the legal will and telling her to cease contact. Derek and Ashley started posting on social media, vague messages about family betrayal and elderly relatives being taken advantage of. People Harold hadn't seen in decades started commenting, asking questions, taking sides. Martha deleted her Facebook account. Then the news media got involved. A local reporter from Flagstaff did a story about the Holloway estate, describing it as a reclusive millionaire's hidden fortune discovered after death. They didn't use Harold and Martha's names, but they didn't have to. Everyone who mattered already knew. The reporter tried calling, showed up at their apartment. Harold had to threaten to call the police before he left. Marcus, the security consultant, sat them down. "This is escalating," he said. "You need to take this seriously. We're recommending 24-hour security detail and immediate relocation. You're not safe here." Harold looked around their tiny apartment, the place they called home for 18 years. "We're really not safe." Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. "You're worth $250 million and everyone knows it. Greed makes people do terrible things." 2 days later, Harold and Martha moved out. Marcus arranged for a short-term rental in Scottsdale, a gated community with security guards and cameras. It felt like witness protection. They packed 2 suitcases, left everything else behind, and drove away from their old life in the middle of the night. The new place was nice, far nicer than anywhere they'd ever lived. 2 bedrooms, modern appliances, a pool they'd never use, but it felt like a prison. They couldn't go anywhere without Marcus or one of his team accompanying them. They couldn't answer the door. They couldn't even check the mail without security screening it first. Martha cried every night for a week. "This isn't what we wanted," she said. "We just wanted to honor Eugene's memory. We just wanted to do right by him." Harold held her, feeling older than his 71 years. "I know." Meanwhile, David and his team worked on the legal challenges. Garrett filed a formal contest of the will, claiming Eugene had been coerced. It was dismissed within 2 weeks. Nicole filed a claim suggesting the estate should be divided among all living relatives. Also dismissed. Derek and Ashley tried a different angle, claiming the property itself had been promised to Derek's grandfather decades ago. That too went nowhere. But the attempts kept coming. An aunt Harold had met once at a funeral in 1997 claimed Eugene had borrowed money from her in the 70s and never paid it back. A cousin from Eugene's mother's side claimed there was a verbal agreement about inheritance. A man claiming to be Eugene's illegitimate son came forward with a birth certificate that turned out to be forged. David handled each claim methodically, providing documentation, citing case law, shutting them down one by one. But it was exhausting. Every day brought new accusations, new demands, new threats. Harold and Martha felt under siege. One afternoon, as they sat in their rental eating takeout, they didn't taste. Martha set down her fork. "I want to give it away," she said. Harold looked at her. "What?" "The money. Most of it. I want to give it away. We don't need $247 million. We don't need even a fraction of that. Let's keep enough to be comfortable, to not worry anymore, and give the rest to people who actually need it." Harold stared at her. "Martha, that's—" She cut him off. "What? Crazy? Maybe. But think about it. Eugene gave us this gift. He trusted us with it. Not because he thought we'd hoard it or spend it on yachts and mansions, because he knew we'd understand what really matters." Harold sat back. The idea settled over him slowly, like snow. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right." They called David the next morning. He listened to their proposal in silence. "You want to give away approximately $220 million, he said slowly. "Yes," Martha said. "Keep enough for us to live comfortably, pay off any debts, maybe help some friends who've been kind to us. The rest goes to charity. Hospitals, schools, homeless shelters, food banks, places that help people like us, people who've been forgotten." David was quiet for a long moment. He paused. "That's actually brilliant." "What?" Harold asked. David's voice carried a smile. "Legally, it protects you. Charitable giving is ironclad. Your relatives can't contest donations made to legitimate non-profits, and morally, it takes away their ammunition. They can't claim you're greedy or that you stole anything when you're literally giving it away." Over the next month, David and Martha worked together to identify charities and causes. Martha researched obsessively, reading reviews, checking financial statements, making sure every dollar would go to organizations that actually helped people. She found a children's hospital in Phoenix that provided free care to low-income families, a homeless veterans program that helped former soldiers find housing and jobs, a food bank that served the same neighborhood where she and Harold had lived for years. a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, a domestic violence shelter that operated on a shoestring budget. The list grew. Harold watched his wife transform. The fear and anxiety that had plagued her for weeks melted away as she focused on helping others. She made calls, asked questions, visited facilities. She met people whose lives would be changed by what she and Harold could give, and slowly she began to smile again. In early October, 3 months after finding the vault, Harold and Martha held a quiet press conference. David arranged it, inviting only carefully selected media outlets. They sat at a simple table, no fancy backdrop, no press kits, just two elderly people in ordinary clothes telling an extraordinary story. Harold spoke first, his voice steady despite the cameras. My wife and I recently inherited property from a distant relative named Eugene Holloway. On that property, we discovered assets that Eugene had carefully accumulated over his lifetime. After consulting with legal and financial advisors, we've decided to donate the majority of these assets to charitable organizations. The reporters erupted with questions. How much? Why? What about your family? Martha raised her hand and the room quieted. We're keeping enough to live comfortably, she said. Enough to not worry about medical bills or rent. But the rest, approximately $220 million, is going to people who need it more than we do. Children who need medical care, veterans who need homes, families who need food, students who need education. That's what Eugene would have wanted. That's what we want, a reporter called out. What about your relatives? Several family members have contested the will. Martha's expression hardened just slightly. Our relatives made their feelings clear when Eugene died. They called his property worthless. They mocked us for accepting it. They only became interested when they learned it had value. We don't owe them anything, Harold added. Eugene left his estate to us because we treated him with basic human decency. We sent him Christmas cards. We remembered he existed, that's all. And now we're honoring his memory by helping people the way he helped us. The press conference made national news. Most coverage was positive, calling Harold and Martha humble heroes, everyday saints, proof that good people still existed. But some outlets focused on the family drama, interviewing Garrett and Nicole and others who painted themselves as victims of a cruel injustice. Harold watched one interview where Garrett, wearing an expensive suit he definitely didn't own before, spoke tearfully about how Uncle Eugene would have wanted the family to share in his legacy. How Harold had manipulated a lonely old man. How this was a tragedy. Harold turned off the television. Martha sat beside him. "Does it hurt?" she asked, "hearing them lie like that?" Harold thought about it. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't, because we know the truth. Eugene knew the truth, and that's enough." The donations began in November. $5 million to the Children's Hospital, $3 million to the Veterans Program, $2 million to the Food Bank, $1 million to the Scholarship Fund. On and on, carefully distributed, properly documented, changing lives with every transfer. Harold and Martha visited some of the organizations personally. They met children who would receive life-saving treatments they couldn't otherwise afford. They met veterans who would finally have stable housing. They met college students who could now finish their degrees without drowning in debt. And in those meetings, something happened. People started recognizing them, not as wealthy donors, but as people just like them. A nurse at the hospital teared up when she met Martha. "You're her," she whispered. "You're the lady from the news. My mom is 73 and lives on Social Security. When I told her your story, she cried. She said it gave her hope that good people still exist." A veteran shook Harold's hand with both of his. "I was sleeping in my car 2 months ago," he said. "Because of what you did, I have an apartment now. I have a job. I have a life again." "Thank you doesn't cover it." A young college student approached them nervously. "I'm the first person in my family to go to college," she said. "My parents clean houses to help pay for it. When I got the scholarship check, My mum screamed for 10 minutes straight. You changed our lives." Martha hugged her, both of them crying. Harold had to step away to compose himself. This, he realized, was what Eugene had really given them. Not money, purpose. By December, the family attacks had mostly died down. Garrett and Nicole tried one final lawsuit, claiming emotional distress and defamation. It was dismissed with prejudice, and they were ordered to pay David's legal fees. After that, the calls stopped. The social media posts stopped. The relatives disappeared back into their lives, bitter but defeated. David called with updates as the last of the donations were finalized. "You've given away $218 million, he said. "Kept $29 million in trust for yourselves, properly invested for long-term stability. You'll have approximately $1.2 million per year in income, more than enough to live very comfortably." Harold thanked him, then asked the question he'd been wondering. "David, why did you take our case? You could have refused, told us to find someone else." David was quiet for a moment. "Because in 30 years of practicing law, I've never met anyone like you two. Most people who suddenly acquire wealth become different people. Greedy, paranoid, cruel. You became more of who you already were. Kind, thoughtful, generous. That's rare. That's worth protecting." Martha cried when Harold told her. On Christmas Eve, Harold and Martha did something they hadn't done in months. They drove back to the cabin. The property looked different now. They'd hired a crew to properly repair it, not to make it fancy, just to make it safe and sound. The roof was new. The porch was rebuilt. The windows were replaced. Inside, it was clean and warm. They'd furnished it simply the way Eugene had lived. Harold stood in the bedroom where they'd found the hatch. The floor had been properly repaired, the vault sealed permanently. They'd taken everything of value out, but they'd left Eugene's photo albums, his personal items, his memory. Martha came up beside him. "Should we sell it?" Harold shook his head. "No. This place, it changed our lives. Maybe we keep it. Come up here sometimes, remember where we came from, remind ourselves what matters." Martha smiled. "I'd like that." They spent Christmas Day at the cabin, just the two of them. They cooked a simple meal, sat by the fire, and talked about everything that had happened. About Eugene and his lonely life. About the family that had shown their true colors. About the people they'd helped and the lives they'd changed. About how strange and wonderful and terrifying it all had been. As the sun set over the mountains, Harold took Martha's hand. "Eugene's letter said to use it wisely," Harold said. "Do you think we did?" Martha looked at him, her eyes soft in the firelight. "I think we did something better. We used it kindly. And sometimes kindness is the wisest thing of all." The new year arrived quietly. Harold and Martha had spent decades watching January 1st come and go with little fanfare. Another day circled on a discount store calendar, another year of just getting by. But January 1st of this year felt different. They woke up in their new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet Phoenix suburb. Not a mansion, not something from a magazine, just a comfortable place with a yard and a porch swing and windows that didn't stick. Martha had cried when they first walked through it, not because it was fancy, but because it was theirs, really theirs, paid in full, no mortgage, no landlord, no fear of eviction notices slipped under the door. Harold made coffee in a kitchen with appliances that worked. Martha sat at the breakfast table, still in her robe, reading the newspaper. The local section had a follow-up story about their donations. The Children's Hospital had broken ground on a new wing. The Veterans Program had expanded to 3 new cities. The food bank had served 200,000 meals in December alone. She read the article twice, her finger tracing the words, still not quite believing they'd been part of making it happen. Harold sat down across from her with 2 mugs. "You thinking about Eugene?" he asked. She nodded. "Every day. I wonder what he'd think of all this." Harold smiled. "I think he'd be proud." I think that's why he chose us. Their doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. Harold tensed. Even now, months later, unexpected visitors made his heart race. But when he checked the security camera David had insisted they install, he saw a young woman holding a package. He opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Jensen?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm from the Hospital Foundation. We wanted to deliver this personally." She handed him a thick envelope and a framed photograph. The photograph showed the new hospital wing under construction, with a banner that read, "Holloway Jensen Family Center." Harold stared at it. "We told them not to name it after us," he said softly. The woman smiled. "They insisted. You gave $23 million. They wanted to honor that. And this," she handed him the envelope, "is thank you letters. From families, from kids, from people whose lives you've touched." Martha came to the door and the woman's eyes widened. "Oh my gosh, you're Mrs. Jensen. My grandmother talks about you all the time. She saw you on the news and she said, the woman's voice cracked. She said, there's still good people in the world. That still matters." She thanked them and left. Harold and Martha took the envelope inside and opened it at the kitchen table. There were hundreds of letters, handwritten notes on lined paper, crayon drawings from children, printed emails from parents. They read them one by one. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, my daughter had a heart condition we couldn't afford to treat. Because of your donation, the hospital did her surgery for free. She's 8 now and she runs and plays like any other kid. You saved her life. We pray for you every night. To the people who helped my dad, he's a veteran with PTSD and he was homeless for 3 years. Your donation gave him an apartment and counseling. Last week he called me for the first time in forever. He said he finally feels like himself again. Thank you for giving me my dad back. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to say thank you. I'm a single mom and I lost my job last year. The food bank you donated to kept my kids fed when I had nothing. You're angels. Thank you." Harold's hands shook as he read. Martha openly wept. They spent the entire morning reading every single letter, every thank you, every story of life changed, hope restored, dignity preserved. When they finished, Martha looked at Harold. "This is what $218 million really looks like," she said. "Not numbers in a bank account. These lives, these families." Harold nodded, unable to speak. Later that day, David called with news. "The last legal challenge from your relatives has been officially withdrawn," he said. "Garrett's attorney filed the paperwork this morning. It's over." Harold exhaled slowly. "Completely over?" "Completely," David confirmed. "They have no legal standing, no remaining claims, no avenue for appeal. The estate is settled. The trust is secured. You're free and clear." Harold thanked him and hung up. He walked out to the porch where Martha was sitting on the swing, watching birds at a feeder she'd hung from the oak tree. "It's over," he said. She looked up. "The family stuff?" He nodded. "All of it. They tried everything and got nothing." She was quiet for a moment. "I almost feel sorry for them." "Almost." Harold sat beside her and the swing rocked gently. They made their choices. They showed us exactly who they were. That week, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived addressed to Harold and Martha Jensen, written in shaky handwriting on cream-colored stationery. The return address was from a nursing home in Flagstaff. Harold opened it carefully. "Dear Harold and Martha, you don't know me, but I knew Eugene. My name is Charlotte Pierce, and I was Eugene's neighbor back in the 1970s and 80s. I lived 2 properties over from his cabin. I'm 91 now and in a care facility, but I saw the news stories about you and the inheritance, and I wanted to write. Eugene was a good man. Lonely, yes, but good. He used to help me with firewood in the winters. Never asked for anything in return. Never wanted company, really, but he was always kind. I remember when he got your Christmas cards. He showed me one once, back in maybe 2002 or 2003. He said, "There's a man in Phoenix who remembers I exist. That's something. He kept every card you sent. I saw them in a box on his table. I just wanted you to know that your small kindness meant the world to him. He talked about you sometimes, wondered if you were doing all right, hoped life was treating you well. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for honoring his memory the way you have. Thank you for showing the world that good people still exist. Thank you for not letting greed turn you into something ugly. My own family stuck me in this place and never visits. They're waiting for me to die so they can sell my house. But seeing what you did, it reminds me that there's still love in the world. God bless you both. Charlotte Pierce." Martha read the letter 3 times. Harold had to step outside because his chest felt too tight. He walked around their small yard, blinking back tears, thinking about Eugene in that cabin, saving Christmas cards from a man he barely knew because they were proof someone cared. Thinking about Charlotte in a nursing home, forgotten by her own children. Finding hope in a news story about 2 strangers. Thinking about how small acts of remembering could echo across years and lives and mean everything. He went back inside and found Martha at the computer. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked up, her jaw set in that determined way he'd learned to recognize over 49 years of marriage. "Finding Charlotte Pierce," she said, "and we're going to visit her." 2 days later, they drove to Flagstaff. The nursing home was clean but institutional, the kind of place that smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables. They found Charlotte in the common room, a tiny woman in a wheelchair, her white hair thin and carefully curled, her hands spotted with age. "Mrs. Pierce?" Martha asked gently. Charlotte looked up and her faded blue eyes went wide. "You came," she whispered. "You actually came." They sat with her for 3 hours. Charlotte told them stories about Eugene, about the cabin in its better years, about the mountains in winter and summer, about a life lived simply but with dignity. She showed them a photograph she kept in her room of her and Eugene standing by his truck, both young, both smiling stiffly at the camera. 1976, she said, before everything got hard. They talked about Charlotte's life, her late husband, her children who never called, her loneliness. Martha held her hand the whole time. When they finally said goodbye, Harold slipped an envelope into Charlotte's lap. "What's this?" she asked. "Just a little something," Harold said, "to make things easier." Charlotte opened it and gasped. Inside was a check for $50,000. "I can't," she started. "Yes, you can," Martha said firmly. "Eugene would want you to have it. And so do we." Charlotte cried so hard a nurse came running. They visited Charlotte 3 more times over the next month. On the 4th visit, she had news. Her children had suddenly reappeared, she said with a wry smile. "The moment the check cleared and I paid for a year of care in advance, suddenly they remembered I existed. Funny how that works." "Are they being kind to you?" Martha asked. Charlotte shrugged. "They're being present. That's something. But I learned my lesson. I called a lawyer and changed my will. Everything goes to charity when I go. They can't have what they didn't earn." Harold smiled. Eugene would approve. Charlotte squeezed his hand. "You two remind me that choosing wisely matters more than blood. Thank you for that." By March, Harold and Martha had settled into a routine. They weren't traveling the world or buying expensive things. Mostly, they lived the same way they always had, just without the constant fear of bills they couldn't pay. Harold volunteered at a community center teaching basic car maintenance to single parents and low-income families. Martha joined a literacy program, helping adults learn to read. They went to diners, not fancy restaurants. They watched movies at home, not in theaters. They wore the same clothes they'd worn before, just maybe with a few new items that didn't come from thrift stores. But they also quietly helped people. When their old landlord called to say the building was being sold and tenants were being displaced, Harold bought the building. He kept the rent the same, fixed everything that needed fixing, and told tenants they had homes for as long as they wanted them. When Martha's former co-worker from her waitressing days called crying because she needed surgery she couldn't afford, they paid for it, anonymously. When Harold's nephew, not one of the relatives who'd come after the inheritance but a good kid who'd always been kind, mentioned he was dropping out of college because of costs, they set up a scholarship fund in his name. They didn't announce these things, didn't post about them, didn't want credit. They just helped because they could, because they remembered what it felt like to need help and have nowhere to turn. In April, the hospital invited them to the grand opening of the Holloway Jensen Family Center. They almost didn't go. The idea of a ceremony, of speeches and cameras, made them both uncomfortable, but David convinced them. "These people want to thank you," he said. "Let them." The ceremony was held on a perfect spring morning. Hundreds of people attended, doctors and nurses, patients and families, community leaders and press. Harold and Martha sat in the front row, holding hands, both overwhelmed. The hospital director spoke about their donation, about the lives it would save, about the legacy of generosity they'd created. Then she invited a family to the podium. A man and woman in their 30s walked up with a little boy, maybe 5 years old, wearing a superhero cape. The woman's voice shook as she spoke. "This is our son, Marcus. Last year, he was diagnosed with leukemia. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. We were facing hundreds of thousands in bills. We were going to lose our house. Then this center opened and everything changed. They treated Marcus for free. They saved his life." She turned to look directly at Harold and Martha. "You didn't just give money. You gave us our son's future. You gave us hope when we had none. How do we thank you for that?" The little boy ran down from the podium and threw his arms around Martha. She hugged him back, tears streaming down her face. The room erupted in applause, but Martha didn't hear it. She just held this child, this living, breathing proof that what they'd done mattered, and she felt something she hadn't felt in decades. She felt like her life had purpose. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached them. Doctors shook their hands, nurses hugged them, patients told them stories of treatments received, surgeries performed, lives saved. A teenage girl showed them her prosthetic leg. "Because of you," she said, "I can dance again." An elderly man showed them a photo of his wife. "She beat cancer here," he said. "We celebrated our 50th anniversary last month because of this place, because of you." Harold and Martha drove home in silence, both emotionally exhausted. When they got home, they sat in their living room, not moving, not speaking, just being. Finally, Harold said what they were both thinking. Eugene knew. Martha looked at him. "What do you mean?" Harold gestured vaguely. Eugene knew what this kind of wealth would do to most people, how it would change them, corrupt them, turn them into something ugly. But he also knew what it would do to us. He knew we'd remember what it felt like to struggle. He knew we'd help others. Martha nodded slowly. "He gave us a test, and I think we passed." May arrived with Arizona heat and one final surprise. Garrett called. Harold almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Yeah?" he said, his tone flat. "Uncle Harold." Garrett's voice was different, softer, uncertain. Look, I know you probably don't want to hear from me." Harold said nothing. Garrett continued, "I've been going to therapy. Court-ordered, actually. After the lawsuit got thrown out, the judge recommended counseling for what he called my obvious issues with money and family." Harold waited. "Anyway, my therapist made me do this exercise where I had to think about why I acted the way I did, why I felt entitled to Eugene's money, why I treated you and Aunt Martha so badly. And I realized," he paused, "I realized I've been a greedy piece of garbage my whole life." Harold blinked, surprised. Garrett kept going. "I thought money would fix everything, you know? My marriage, my job, my life. I thought if I just had more, everything would be okay. But watching what you did, how you gave it all away, how you actually helped people, It made me see how screwed up I've been." Harold leaned back in his chair. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I owe you an apology," Garrett said. "A real one. Not one where I'm trying to get something. Just an actual, 'I'm sorry. I treated you like garbage. I called Eugene's property worthless when you inherited it, then tried to take it when I found out it had value. I threatened you. I made your life hell. And I'm sorry. I can't take it back, but I'm sorry." Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully he said, "I appreciate you saying that." Garrett exhaled shakily. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that what you and Aunt Martha did, it mattered. You showed me what actually being a good person looks like. Thank you for that." After they hung up, Harold sat staring at the phone. Martha came in. "Who was that?" Harold told her. She sat down slowly. "Do you believe him?" Harold shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe. People can change. Or maybe he's just saying what his therapist told him to say." Martha nodded. "Either way, we're not giving him anything." Harold smiled. "No, we're not. But maybe it means something that he called. Maybe it means we affected more than just the people we donated to. Maybe we affected him too." June brought more calls, but these were different. These were from family members they'd never expected to hear from, the quiet ones, the ones who hadn't joined Garrett's crusade. Harold's cousin from Montana called. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you," she said. "I saw what you did with Eugene's money. That took courage. A lot of people would have kept it all. You showed real character." Eugene's second nephew, the one from California who'd stayed silent during all the lawsuits, sent a letter. "I'm ashamed I didn't speak up when Garrett was attacking you. I should have defended you. You deserved better from this family. For what it's worth, I think Eugene chose perfectly." Even Nicole called, though her apology was stiff and clearly forced. "My lawyer suggested I reach out," she said, "to clear the air. I may have been hasty in my judgment." Harold accepted each apology with grace, but didn't pretend everything was fine. The damage had been done. The relationships, such as they were, had been broken, but he appreciated that some family members were at least trying to acknowledge their mistakes. By July, Harold and Martha decided it was time to do something with the cabin. They'd been maintaining it, visiting occasionally, but it sat empty most of the time. "Seems wrong," Martha said one evening, "to keep it locked up when it could be useful." "What are you thinking?" Harold asked. She'd been researching, it turned out. Writers' retreats, artists' residencies. She showed him websites of programs where creators could stay in quiet places to work on projects without distractions. "What if we turned the cabin into something like that?" she said. "A free retreat for artists and writers who can't afford expensive programs. They could stay for a week, a month, however long they need. Create in peace. Eugene lived his whole life in solitude up there. What if we transformed that solitude into something creative?" Harold loved the idea. They worked with David to set up a non-profit foundation, the Eugene Holloway Artist Retreat. They renovated the cabin properly this time, adding a second bedroom, updating the kitchen, installing reliable heat and electricity. They kept it simple, rustic, true to Eugene's aesthetic, but functional. They created an application process, prioritizing artists from low-income backgrounds, people of color, LGBTQ creators, anyone who faced barriers in traditional art spaces. The first resident arrived in September. Her name was Patricia, a 67-year-old poet from Detroit who'd been writing her whole life but never had time or space to finish her manuscript. She spent 4 weeks at the cabin and emerged with a completed poetry collection. When she left, she hugged Martha and cried. "No one's ever given me this kind of gift," she said. "Just time and space and belief that my work matters. Thank you." Over the next year, 30 artists stayed at the retreat. Painters, writers, sculptors, musicians. They created novels and albums and art series and plays. Some went on to publish or exhibit or perform their work. Others simply found healing in the solitude, in being taken seriously, in having their creativity valued. Every single one left a note in the guest book Harold and Martha had placed on the cabin table. "Thank you for this sacred space. This place changed my life. Eugene's spirit lives here in the best way. I finished my book here. I found myself here. I remembered why I create here." Reading those entries became Harold and Martha's favorite thing, proof that Eugene's lonely cabin had become a place of creation, community, and hope. By the time their 72nd birthdays arrived in November, Harold and Martha had lived a year they never could have imagined. They'd gone from broke and forgotten to wealthy and celebrated. They'd been attacked by family and defended by strangers. They'd given away a fortune and gained a purpose. They'd transformed a crumbling cabin into a beacon for artists. They'd saved lives, changed trajectories, and proven that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. On their birthday, which they shared, born 2 days apart but always celebrated together, they drove up to the cabin. Not for a ceremony, just for themselves. They sat on the newly rebuilt porch, drinking coffee from a thermos, watching the sun set over the mountains. Harold broke the silence. "Do you ever wish we'd kept more of the money?" Martha considered the question. "Maybe for a second," she admitted. "When I see a nice coat or think about traveling to places we've only seen on television. But then I think about Marcus in his superhero cape, and that veteran who got his life back, and Charlotte not dying alone, and Patricia finishing her poetry. And I think, no, I don't wish that at all." Harold nodded. "Me neither. We have enough. We have more than enough. And this," he gestured at the cabin, "the mountains, the endless sky, this is wealth. Real wealth." Martha leaned against him. "Eugene would be proud." Harold smiled. "Yeah, I think he would be." They stayed until the stars came out, brilliant and countless in the mountain darkness. Driving back down, Martha said something that had been on her mind. "You know what the real miracle is? Not the money, not even the vault. It's that we stayed ourselves. We could have become different people, greedy, paranoid, isolated, but we didn't. We're still us, just with better plumbing." Harold laughed, the sound echoing in the car. "That's because we never forgot where we came from. We never forgot what it felt like to choose between medicine and groceries, to be invisible, to be dismissed. We remembered, and that made all the difference." December came again, full circle. Christmas approached, and Harold did what he'd done for 21 years. He sat down to write a Christmas card. But this year, there was no Eugene to send it to. Instead, he wrote to Charlotte, and to Patricia, and to Marcus's parents, and to a dozen other people whose lives had intersected with theirs. Each card carried the same simple message: "Thinking of you, hoping you're well. You matter." Martha watched him address the envelopes with the same careful handwriting Eugene must have seen on those cards that meant so much. "You're going to make them cry," she said. Harold shrugged. Good tears, though. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a small gathering at their house. Not family, except for Harold's nephew, who'd gotten the scholarship. Instead, they invited people they'd met through their year of giving. Charlotte came, with her newly attentive children helping her. Marcus and his family came, the little boy still wearing superhero capes everywhere. A veteran from the housing program came. A nurse from the hospital came. Patricia the poet came and brought copies of her newly published book for everyone. David and his wife came. Frank, Eugene's old neighbor, drove down from the mountains. They ate simple food, shared stories, laughed until they cried. At one point, young Marcus stood on a chair and announced very seriously, "Mr. Harold and Mrs. Martha are the best people in the world." Everyone applauded. Martha had to leave the room for a moment to compose herself. Later, after everyone had gone home, Harold and Martha cleaned up together in comfortable silence. As Martha washed dishes, she said, "This is what it's all about, isn't it? Not the money. This. People. Connection. Kindness." Harold dried a plate. Yeah, Eugene gave us money. But what he really gave us was a chance to matter, to leave something behind besides unpaid bills. We got to be part of other people's stories. That's the real inheritance. They finished cleaning and sat together on their couch, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly. Martha pulled out something she'd been saving, a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from the hospital, an annual report on the Holloway Jensen Family Center. In its first year, the center had treated 4,200 patients. It had performed 360 surgeries. It had saved an estimated 270 lives. Harold read the numbers twice. 270 people, he said softly. 270 people who are alive, who get to see another Christmas because of what we did, because of what Eugene trusted us to do. Martha rested her head on his shoulder. We were good stewards. That's all anyone can ask. As the new year approached again, Harold and Martha reflected on the journey. They'd started as invisible elderly people, dismissed by family, barely surviving on fixed incomes. They'd been mocked for inheriting a broken cabin. They'd been attacked when the truth came out. They'd been called manipulative, greedy, senile. But they'd never wavered. They'd remembered Eugene's kindness in trusting them. They'd honored his memory by helping others the way he'd helped them. They'd turned a hidden fortune into visible good. They'd proven that wealth wasn't about what you kept, but what you gave. That character mattered more than blood. That kindness, even in small doses like Christmas cards to a lonely man, could echo across years and change everything. One afternoon in late January, Harold received a call from an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Is this Harold Jensen?" a woman's voice asked. "It is. My name is Jennifer Holloway. I'm Eugene's great-niece. We've never met." Harold tensed, preparing for another attempt at claiming money. But Jennifer continued quickly. "I'm calling because I want to thank you. My branch of the family is out in Oregon. We didn't know Eugene well, but we heard about what happened, about the inheritance, about how you were treated, about what you did with the money." She paused. "My father, Eugene's nephew, died 5 years ago. But before he did, he told me Eugene was the best man in our family. Said he wished more Holloways were like him. When I heard what you did, giving away all that money, helping all those people, I thought, that's what a Holloway should be. That's the legacy worth carrying. So I just wanted to call and say thank you. Thank you for honoring Eugene. Thank you for being better than the rest of our family. And thank you for showing my kids, I have 3 of them, what integrity looks like." Harold felt tears prick his eyes. "That means a lot, Jennifer. Thank you for calling." "We should stay in touch," she said. "Not because I want anything, just because I think Eugene would like knowing that some of his family turned out okay." Harold smiled. "I'd like that." They talked for an hour. Jennifer told stories about her father and Eugene, about family dynamics, about how she'd always felt like the black sheep for not being money-obsessed. Harold told her about the artist retreat, about the donations, about Charlotte and Marcus, and all the lives touched. By the end of the call, they'd made plans for Jennifer and her family to visit Arizona in the spring, to see the cabin, to meet Harold and Martha properly. When Harold hung up, he told Martha about the conversation. "See," Martha said, "not everyone is Garrett. Some people get it. Some people understand what really matters." Harold nodded. "And maybe that's Eugene's final gift, not the money. The chance to find out who people really are. The chance to find family in unexpected places." By February, Harold and Martha had been managing their new life for over a year. They'd learned to navigate wealth while staying grounded. They'd learned to protect themselves while staying generous. They'd learned that they couldn't save everyone, but they could help many. One evening, Martha suggested something new. "What if we wrote a book?" Harold looked up from his crossword puzzle. "A book? About what?" "About this. About Eugene. About finding the vault. About what we did. About the lessons we learned. Not to brag, but to maybe help other people who suddenly come into money, or people who are dealing with greedy family. or people who just need to hear that choosing kindness over greed is possible. Harold thought about it. Who'd read a book by two old mechanics? Martha smiled. People who need to know that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. They spent the next 6 months working with a ghostwriter David recommended. The book, titled The Inheritance of Kindness, What a Christmas Card Taught Us About Wealth, came out in September. It was a modest success, not a bestseller, but it found its audience. People who'd inherited money and felt overwhelmed. People dealing with toxic family dynamics. People who wanted to believe goodness still existed. Harold and Martha did a few bookstore readings. At one, in a small shop in Tempe, an elderly man raised his hand during the question and answer session. "I just inherited some money from my brother," he said. "Not millions, but enough to change my life. My kids are already fighting about it. After reading your book, I've decided to do what you did. Keep what I need, give away the rest. Thank you for showing me that's okay." Martha wiped her eyes. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. By the time their 73rd birthdays arrived, Harold and Martha had lived more in 2 years than they had in the previous decade. They'd gone from invisible to visible, from powerless to powerful, from forgotten to remembered. But the most important thing, the thing they reminded each other of every single day, was that they hadn't changed who they were. They'd just become more of it. Harold still fixed cars for friends. Martha still volunteered at the literacy center. They still ate at diners and watched movies at home and lived simply. The difference was they no longer lived in fear. They no longer worried about medical bills or rent or whether they'd have enough. And with that freedom from fear came the freedom to be generous, to be kind, to be exactly who Eugene had believed they were. On a cool December evening, 2 years after finding the vault, Harold and Martha drove up to the cabin one last time before winter made the roads impassable. They'd received word that a sculptor was finishing her residency and wanted to leave something behind, a gift for the retreat. When they arrived, they found her waiting on the porch. She was young, maybe 30, with paint-stained hands and bright eyes. "I wanted to show you before I left," she said. She led them around to the side of the cabin where a large stone had been placed, smooth and grey, about 3 feet tall. Carved into it, in beautiful letters, were words. Eugene Holloway lived here in solitude. Harold and Martha Jensen transformed it into community. May all who enter find what they need, silence or song, solitude or connection, peace or passion. May creativity flourish here. May kindness echo here. May this place always remember that wealth is measured not in what we hoard, but in what we share. Established 2024. Harold couldn't speak. Martha traced the letters with her fingers. "It's perfect," she whispered. They stood looking at the stone as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Harold put his arm around Martha. "We did good, didn't we?" She leaned into him. "We did better than good. We did right." And that night, as they drove back down the mountain, Harold thought about the journey, about a crumbling cabin bought for 73 cents at a tax auction, about cruel relatives who showed their true nature, about a vault filled with gold and a letter filled with grace, about choices made and lives changed, about 2 elderly people who'd been invisible their whole lives suddenly mattering in ways they never imagined. Anyone can choose kindness when it costs nothing. The real test is choosing it when you have everything to lose, when family turns on you, when the world tells you to be greedy, when you could easily justify keeping it all. Harold and Martha passed that test. They proved that true wealth isn't measured in gold bars or bank accounts. It's measured in Christmas cards sent to lonely men, in hospital wings that save children, in housing for veterans, in space for artists to create, in the lives you touch and the kindness you spread and the legacy you leave behind. Eugene Holloway died alone in a cabin, but he isn't forgotten. His name is on a hospital center. His cabin shelters artists. His fortune feeds the hungry and houses the homeless and educates the poor. And two elderly people who everyone dismissed, everyone overlooked, everyone mocked, became the stewards of his memory and the proof that goodness still exists. Because at the end of the day, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the character to use it well, the courage to stay true to yourself, and the wisdom to know that some things matter more than gold. Harold and Martha Jensen understood that, and in understanding it, they became richer than they ever dreamed, not in dollars, but in purpose, not in possessions, but in peace, not in what they owned, but in who they'd been and who they'd helped others become. The cabin still stands in the mountains. Artists still create there. The vault beneath it is empty now, but the legacy it held has spread across Arizona and beyond, touching thousands of lives, changing hundreds of trajectories, proving that one kind man's trust in two kind people could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. And on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the pines and the stars shine brilliant overhead, you can almost feel Eugene's presence there, smiling, grateful, at peace. Because Harold and Martha didn't just inherit his fortune, they inherited his hope, and they made it real. The end. Up next, two more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that kindness is the greatest wealth of all, and that character matters more than cash. Because these stories, they're not just about money or luck or winning the lottery of life, they're about choice. The choice to be good when being greedy is easier. The choice to remember others when everyone's forgotten you. The choice to lift up instead of tear down. And that choice, that beautiful, difficult, world-changing choice, is available to all of us every single day. So choose wisely, choose kindly, and maybe, just maybe, you'll leave behind a legacy that matters more than gold.